Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time we left off with the rebellious daughters, talking about the American colonies and how they were starting to get a little rebellious to the crown of England. And we looked off at a lot of pictures, some of Minutemen, some of battles and things like that, and then just the raising of the Liberty Pole. But now we're on to George Washington, probably one of the most important individuals during this whole thing. Okay, yep, good. That makes my life easy. Okay, let's get into it. The first British miscalculation was that the war would be confined to Massachusetts. But already the colony was in touch with other colonies by committees of correspondence. Militia were being organized everywhere. The first battles, naturally, were fought in the neighborhood of Boston, Lexington, Concord, and Bunker Hill. But when the colonists sought a commander-in-chief, they looked to Virginia. George Washington, born 1732, dies 1799, was no revolutionary firebrand like Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, or Tom Paine. He was a well-to-do planter, rather conservative by temperament, a varsity man of the Episcopal Church, and sometime member of Virginia House of Burgesses. He had a good military record in the French and Indian War, where he extricated the remnant of Braddock's army from defeat. But interested as he was in his profession of arms, always nearest to his heart was his estate of Mount Vernon. King George III was often affectionately called Farmer George by his subjects, and the same title might be given to his famous rival. Whenever relieved of political or military duty, he returned to his plantation. Here he was happiest and most at home. Was he a great general in the European sense? It is impossible to say, for at no time did he have a very large or well-disciplined army. His troops, like himself, were 9 parts farmer to 1 part soldier. But he had the qualities needed for wielding a mass of raw volunteers into an efficient force and keeping a spirit of constant resolution among his troops. Washington himself was a strict, even a stern disciplinarian, ready to dismiss an inefficient officer or order flogging for a deserter. Some experienced foreign officers brought stiffening to the ranks. The Marquis de Lafayette from France, Baron von Steuben from Germany, Thaddeus Kosciuszko from Poland. I apologize for that. Polish names, not my easiest. But the task before the rebel forces was almost an impossible one. The Americans were in the position of a man simultaneously building a shop, doing business in it, and putting out a fire threatening to consume it. An army had to be improvised, a new government created, and a war successfully prosecuted. On the face of the matter, the British should have won easily. They had the support of a wealthy and respectable section of the population who called themselves Loyalists, and whom others called Tories. They had the support of trained, veteran British soldiers. They had the aid of mercenaries from Hanover and Hesse, and the support of certain Indian tribes. Their opponents, the Patriots, to themselves and rebels to the British, probably outnumbered the Loyalists and were excellent raw material for warfare. They usually knew how to shoot, ride, and take care of themselves in the open, but after a victory they were hard to hold in line, desiring to get back to their neglected farms. In the later stages of the war, they had effective support from France. There was, as always in revolutions, a third party, which tends to get overlooked: the neutral, who wished to get ahead with the spring plowing under whatever flag. They were especially numerous among the non-British elements in the population, such as the Germans and the Dutch. Many Quakers also believed that all war was contrary to Christian teaching, refrained from taking either side. Fortunately for the American cause, the British, with far less excuse, were equally inefficient. The vast wilderness of America, the unbroken forests, the scattered farms, were an unfamiliar terrain to British soldiers accustomed to win wars by pitched battles and captured cities. The British had their share of victories and occupied the larger towns, but found themselves as far as ever from the conquering of America. The British had some able generals, but some of these were half-hearted, feeling that colonists had some right on their side, and some were too easygoing, believing the Revolution was merely a flash in the pan, soon to be extinguished. The direction of the war from London was most incompetent. The Colonial Secretary, Lord George Germain, had been dismissed from the army as unfit to serve in any military capacity, and the Earl of Sandwich, First Lord of the Admiralty, had been termed by a historian, who himself filled the naval office, the most negligent administrator who ever sat at the head of the table of the Admiralty. King George, Lord North, King George, by the way, had zeal but little wisdom to contribute to the war, and his chief minister, Lord North, followed his lead, but with increasing reluctance, for he could see that the war was going badly. Washington, at his best, or as his best biographer, Douglas Freeman, has stated, could war the better against Britain because he was not at war with himself. None of his energies had to be diverted from administration and planning and operations, to combat selfish ambition or to overcome distracting passions. Yeah, they obviously bring up quite a bit here, but the British do have a lot of ineffectiveness, which is surprising. Obviously, on paper, the British Army is the strongest in the world, especially after the French and Indian War or the 7 Years' War. They come out pretty good, and their empire is quite vast, and their strength is also quite vast. So on paper, they should win. But a lot of issues come up from a lot of commanders, like they said, Admiralty, a lot of generals, and things like that. You have a lot of them that just kind of like only half-heartedly really fight. And you have one that really tries hard, but everyone else around him is twiddling their thumbs. And like I said, the king, he had a lot of zeal, and that's really good. But if he doesn't have much to contribute, it doesn't really matter as much. The Americans, they're not really soldiers. They're just not. They try to be. They really do. And as the war goes on, they become better soldiers. But for most of the war, they're pretty inefficient. They, there are a lot of farmers, and like they said, a lot of them after a victory, they want to go back home. Okay, we won. Okay, let's go back. I need to worry about my farm. And that's a reasonable reason. You need to feed your family. You need to ensure that your farm is doing well. Obviously, that does not make a good soldier, though. And Washington, he's a great leader, probably one of the best, but he's not a good general. He's just not. He's not a good military general. He is not a good tactician. Let's go with that. He's not a good tactician. Great leader, probably, like I said, one of the best. But militarily, he's just not that good. He gets outflanked many a time, and kind of just it's just not that great. There are better generals in the American army, but what all those generals lack, as they mention here, is that they don't have the character of Washington. Washington doesn't really want much. He just wants to go to Mount Vernon. He wants to be at home in Mount Vernon. He likes to be a war general. He likes to be in the military. It is very much who he is. He is a military man. But he loves Mount Vernon more than anything, even the military. He wants to go home to his wife, to just work on his plantation, and that's it. So he doesn't have this great ambition. A lot of the generals do. You can look at Horatio Gates. Gates, decent general, not the best. Realistically, there was actually someone else that you could really claim he got his stuff from. But one of his main problems that Gates had was ambition. He wanted to take Washington's spot, and but it's his ambition that screws him over because that's what he wants. Washington doesn't necessarily want it, and the appointment of Washington was in part to try to get the other colonies into the war. Um, he was chosen by John Adams, actually, interestingly enough, because he saw it as, well, if a Virginian is in charge, a lot of other a lot of other colonies are going to join because it's like, oh, well, it's not just a Massachusetts thing, it's not just a New England thing, it's not just that. It is including Virginia and the South and things like that. So Washington was a very smart and strategic placement of a leader, and man, they couldn't have probably picked a better one. If Washington was a little bit better of a general, yeah, maybe. Okay, maybe they could have picked a better one. But in terms of overall commander, definitely the best. Like they said in the earlier parts in here, Washington is um, a very good guy to get the troops together. Multiple times the army almost falls apart, and it's through the charisma and the ability of Washington that it does not. He really can't be understated as a leader. Was he perfect, man? No, of course he wasn't. Nobody's perfect. But as a leader of men, probably the best. Honestly, probably one of the best in history. I know that's really pushing him, okay? Really glazing him. But for what the country needed, at least, definitely was one of the best. But now we're going to get into the pictures here. At the top, so right here, uh, George Washington, at the age of 40, 3 years before he was appointed commander of the army. Above here is a printed call to enlist in the Continental Army. Enlistees were offered a bounty of $12, an annual and fully sufficient supply of good and handsome clothing, a daily allowance of large and ample rations of provisions, together with $60 a year in gold and silver money on account of pay. Now, do they get this? No, not really. A lot of this stuff they just don't get. The army is kind of in a place where it's just like, we can't really supply these things as well. And the money situation, that really doesn't amount to anything. A lot of these troops get these IOUs later on from the government, and they kind of get upset. They and some people buy them from them. They buy them in bulk, and because they know the government's eventually going to be able to pay back these bonds that they give these soldiers. But the soldiers don't think that. They just need the money now. So a lot of these people get really, really rich because they buy up all these IOUs, and then when the government's able to pay, they take them in, and they get big, big paychecks. Eventually, the government puts a stopgap on that, but it's kind of crazy that even happened. And a lot of these soldiers too will be given land as kind of recompense. Like, hey, you know what? Here's land that you can have. It's kind of a better way to pay. A lot of these soldiers will much more appreciate that. Okay, here. So up here, is a portrait of Washington at Yorktown. So there you go. Look at that. There's Washington right at Yorktown. The glare. There we go. Quite a great painting, I would say. And then here is a map of George Washington's position on the York River in 1781. On the 19th of October, 1781, General Charles Cornwallis surrendered his entire command at Yorktown. This combined French and American victory practically assured the independence of the United States. So you can kind of see the York River there. And yeah, they kind of very quickly mention it here. I'm sure they'll get into it in the next little story time here. But the French and a few others as well, the Dutch, and Spanish actually, but really help. But the French put troops in. They do the bulk of things. Without the French, the United States does not win. The French Navy, more or less, neutralizes the British Navy in this regard, and will ensure that the United States becomes independent. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have any ways I can improve these videos, please leave a comment down below. I always appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.